The DA is calling for Parliament to come up with legislation to govern coalition governments in the country. Party leader John Steenhuisen has accused the ANC of illegally collapsing the DA's coalitions in Gauteng and Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. Now, to find out about the legislative framework around coalitions, possibly, as the DA is now suggesting, we can speak to the Executive Chairman at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Tselane. A very good afternoon to you, sir. I'm grateful for your time. So the first thing that the DA suggests in this proposal is that parties get at least 1% of overall votes before they get a seat in either provincial legislatures or in Parliament. Is that a fair ask or gatekeeping by the bigger party?
Well, good afternoon to you and to your viewers, and thank you very much for having me. Let me indicate firstly that I have over the years been advocating for regulation of coalitions. And the reason why I have been advocating for that is largely because there is a need to have stability, particularly in relation to service delivery in different communities where we have coalition governments. However, we must understand that a coalition arrangement only comes into being after there is no single party that has actually managed to garner sufficient support to be able to form a government. So it is a system of governance that is based on cooperation. So the arrangement that is being suggested by the Democratic Alliance, I think firstly would be undemocratic, and I think would also be inconsistent with the constitution of the country. If a political party has got sufficient numbers to be able to govern, of course that political party would be able to establish a government. But if it does not have sufficient support, it would of course require support of other parties. And it is not up to a party that has got more voters or more support to determine the kind of a partner that they should have, as well as determine the prerequisite for that particular partner to be part of the government. The negotiations cannot be predetermined and it cannot be legislated upon. There must be proper negotiations between a party that is not able to form a government and any party that can assist that party to constitute a government.
So on the coalition agreements themselves, the DA says what we need to do is go into an era where, for example, there are clear guidelines on what the parties will do as per the agreement, even around conflict resolution that should be set out, for instance, more clearly, and the agreements made more public. Do you think those three changes would give us a better run of coalition governments?
Absolutely. I mean, the issue of conflict resolution or dispute resolution mechanism being embedded within the coalition agreement is a critical aspect. I mean, if you look at all coalitions all over the world, whether you're looking in the African continent, in places such as Kenya or in Western Europe, you find that the dispute resolution mechanism is an integral part of the system that governs the coalitions. So there is, of course, a necessity to make sure that there is that aspect integrated within the coalition agreements wherever they are established.
And the issue with South African coalitions, and you can disagree with this, Mr. Tselane, if you will, is it seems it's not necessarily about the running of the metros necessarily, but more to do with political parties who go into these arrangements, even though ideologically they know good and well that they stand at such different points. Do you agree?
Well, there is nothing really that prevents political parties, even if ideologically they do not agree, for agreeing and cooperating on a delivery project in a particular area. You know, so even if you've got a party that is on the left or on the right, if those two parties are able to meet and agree that in the interest of the constituencies that they are representing, they believe that they can actually be able to cooperate and form a coalition arrangement that will be able to deliver services. There's nothing absolutely wrong. In fact, it's something that is commendable. But the difficulty with the South African situation is that agreements are reached just 3 days before government is formed, or even on the eve of a government being formed. And then therefore, there is no really proper negotiation around the key principles and service delivery issues that affect the constituencies. If you look, for instance, in Germany, I mean, it took them almost 6 months to negotiate around a program of action around key areas. They had task teams that they had established over that particular period to make sure that they can actually agree on each and every aspect that is going to be governing a coalition arrangement.
And the DA speaks to that in its proposal. What it says is there needs to be an extension of that 14-day deadline for the appointment of a president, premiers, and mayors. But how much time would be enough?
No, like I'm suggesting that in the case of Germany, I'm aware that it took them almost 6 months to finalize the arrangement on coalition. And so it is going to be important that we begin to have some kind of an interim mechanism so that the political parties are not forced by the deadline of constituting a government to conclude on key areas that are supposed to be agreeing on that is going to be governing the coalition arrangement, so that there is sufficient time given to the conversation and discussions around those key aspects around which they agree. So the difficulty, as I've indicated, is that unfortunately we don't have a proper regulation of coalition in South Africa, and therefore there are also no interim mechanism that we can rely on so that service delivery continues, and that administration is not handicapped by the fact that there are negotiations taking place amongst players that are likely to form coalition arrangements.
Action SA is doing an interesting thing at the moment. They're out speaking to their supporters, their voters, trying to get an idea of what they think about the party strategy as far as coalitions are concerned, right? And what's come up frequently from some voters is that they vote for Party A instead of Party B, yet those parties then come together to form a coalition, ultimately giving party or power to an organization they don't want in charge of anything, and therefore they feel as though they've to an extent been taken for a ride. Is broader consultation with the electorate what's needed next by all political parties, perhaps?
I think there is a need for maturity in the South African electoral space. And what it also means is that there is a need for voter education so that our electorate begins to understand that South Africa has now moved to a situation where there is no longer one dominant political party, and therefore that there is going to be a need for political parties to compromise some of their key positions in order to be able to ensure governance happens and that service delivery does happen at the local level. So this is a new terrain for the South Africans, and it is not only for political parties but also for the electorate to understand that in an event where there is no one dominant political party, there is going to be a need for coalition. And that cooperation might mean having to work with some of the political parties that were opposing during the campaign. And that this is a necessary arrangement in an event where there is no one dominant political party, and that there is a need for cooperation. And then those partners may be people that you may not necessarily wanted to work with.
Okay. Tselane, always a pleasure to speak to you, Executive Chairman at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. Thank you, sir.